Hey, church family, I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we prayerfully move forward into this exciting new year. Now, in order to make sense of the direction that our nation is currently headed in, we should take some time to consider the communist goals which were identified in Congress back in 1963. One of the goals of the communists who are determined to take control of our country, one of those goals is stated in this way: use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. Or in other words, the communists have a plan to use riots in order to sway public opinion and turn that public opinion against any organization that would stand in the way of a communist takeover. With that being the case, and as we consider this goal, we have to ask, is it possible that a group of leftist activists dressed up like Trump supporters last Wednesday in order to go and turn a peaceful protest into a angry, riotous mob? I realize now that there are fact checkers who are currently dismissing this as nothing more than a conspiracy theory. And yet here's one fact that we are aware of. We know for a fact that there was a BLM activist, his name is John Sullivan, who was part of the group that entered the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday. This individual named John Sullivan, we actually have video of him from last August when he took the stage at a BLM rally. And on the stage, he promised to go and rip President Trump out of the White House. That was his goal in August, to rip President Trump out of the White House. So then, why was John Sullivan, a known BLM activist, why was he one of the first ones up the steps of our nation's Capitol last Wednesday? Did he have a change of heart? Is he now a Trump supporter? Or does he still have the same goal to rip Trump out of the White House? Is it possible that John Sullivan is a leftist activist who was sent in to start a riot so that Trump might be tried for treason and sedition? It's hard to say at this point in time, and yet I'll remind you, it was 1963 when we discovered that the communists have been using riots to foment public protests against any organization or program that is opposed to communism. Another communist goal, which was revealed back in 1963, was their plan to infiltrate the press, and to do this by gaining control of key positions in radio, television, and motion pictures. So then we should ask, has the mainstream media been infiltrated by communists? Is that already happening? Well, with this question in mind, let's take a moment to remember the way that the mainstream media covered the story about the anti-Kavanaugh protesters who occupied the Capitol building back in 2018. Remember, the activists who not only occupied the rotunda steps on the east front of the U.S. Capitol, they also were banging on the doors of the Supreme Court, which apparently were locked. But did the mainstream media call them treasonous insurrectionists? No, they were celebrated. They were celebrated as protesters and demonstrators who were fighting the good civil rights fight. Well, in contrast to this, now consider how quickly the mainstream media began to accuse the Trump supporters of violent insurrection. The New York Times has recently said that these Trump supporters were criminal, fraudulent, even treasonous. CNN's Van Jones declared as he watched, the events that unfolded on Wednesday, he said, "This is treason. This is treason. This is insurrection. This is rebellion, period." That's the way he described it. Now let's think about this for a moment. Why is it that the mainstream media treats one angry mob at the Capitol as a civil rights movement which should be celebrated, but then it treats another angry mob at the Capitol as insurrection, treason, just criminals? And why is it that they have this point of view? Is this not evidence that the press is completely biased and seems to have been infiltrated by communists who are attempting to sway public opinion as they spin the story about these riots? Are they attempting to tear our country apart so that it's easy for communism to take deeper root in our country? Certainly seems that way to me. Now, as a Christian, my greatest concern about this communist takeover of America, it's based more on the way that communists always try to take control of the church. In order to prove my point, I would appeal once again to the communist goals which were revealed back in 1963. One stated goal is this: to infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. This includes the discrediting of the Bible, to cause Christians to have a low view of the scriptures, to deny, infallibility and inerrancy. And this goal also includes the emphasizing of the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Now, if there's reason to believe that the communists are, inciting riots in order to sway public opinion, and if there's reason for us to believe that the media has been taken over by communists who are attempting to sway public opinion, then how likely is it that many churches have already been infiltrated and are currently being influenced by a communist agenda as they continue to prepare our country for a communist takeover? Seems pretty likely to me, and with that being the case, I encourage every Christian to make sure that you're attending a church where the pastor has a high view of the Bible and where your pastor is teaching line by line, verse by verse through the books of the Bible. And listen, if your pastor begins to emphasize a social gospel and social justice, listen, if this is an emphasis in your church, then it's time to go and find another church that is dedicated to the true gospel message of Jesus Christ. Well, knowing that communist activists are trying to change our churches into, organizations that might have a form of godliness but deny the power of God, I encourage every believer, let's make sure that we're examining what's being taught at our churches. And let's take a stand against the communist takeover of our churches. And the best way to do this is by becoming completely committed Christians who every day are fighting the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.